Hi, and welcome to the Let's Talk Melbourne podcast, a place for critical conversation, curiosity, and the big picture from the city of Melbourne. I'm your host, Vikas Raheja, and let's get started. What is good journalism? What is journalism in the world of alternate facts or fake news and social media news consumption? Where is good journalism and how do people go to get fact-based news? Today, we've got a very special guest in our studio to talk about this and more. And I will request my guest to introduce. You may be familiar. You might have seen him on television, but I'll let my guest introduce himself.
Vic, I'm usually wearing a suit, so maybe the T-shirt's giving it away. My name is Blake Johnson, and I work for Channel 7 News, reporting on the 7 News Melbourne team. I've been here 6.5 years. Before that, spent 8.5 years working for 7 in Perth. So all up 15 years with the 7 network.
Awesome. And I have to say I'm a bit starstruck today because I'm used to seeing you on television or when you're moonlighting as an influencer on Instagram. So to see you in person is different.
Influencer, that's a bit of a stretch, but I'll take it.
That's why I said moonlighting, to quote unquote. I mean that as a compliment, by the way.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'll take it.
Well, welcome to Let's Talk Melbourne. This is a podcast we do. And before we start, I have to thank our sponsors, Construct Mart and Flows Trading and Clearance Centre and Adoria Jewels. So thank you for your sponsorship. Blake, before we start the podcast, Let's Talk Melbourne, if I had to make you walk down memory lane, when was the first, or do you remember the first time you said, okay, I want to take journalism as a career?
I do. It's a little bit grim.
Yeah.
September 11, 2001. I was 15.
Yep.
I was at boarding school in Perth. And, as was the whole world, transfixed by the events that happened. And I just have this distinct memory that I was watching the world change.
Yep.
Even at the age of 15.
And live.
Yeah, live.
Live, yeah.
And that was my first real introduction to rolling news coverage. And I remember sitting up late at night at boarding school, shocked into silence, and then the next day watching it, and then the year later for the 1 year commemorations, still being so interested in it, and seeing these people at work, the reporters, live television, it just sparked something in me. And then from there, in that same year, my year 11 English teacher, I never thought I was particularly good at oral presentations, but I did one in that year, and he said, "You've got a natural flair for it, like you're quite good at it." And it was that unlocking key in my mind moment that was like, oh, maybe I can do this. So yeah, a major world event and one positive teacher guided me towards where we are today.
And weren't you scared to get into this profession at the time, or was it just that trigger, or if trigger is the right word, or was that
spark
that sort of made you say, okay,
Mate, I'm
still
do this. Scared. Like I still get nerves.
Yeah? After so many years?
Of course. I think it's natural, and I think I encourage the nerves because generally speaking, when you're on your toes, you perform a little better, right?
Yep.
I think if you get comfortable in life, that's when you start to make mistakes or your work's not as good as it could be. There's still times when I'm shaping up for a live cross, when it's breaking news, haven't had much time to get my thoughts together, and they're like in your ear, you've got 30 seconds till you're on.
Yeah.
And you think, oh, jeez, what am I going to do?
Yep.
And then it becomes instinct. Just tell the story in the clearest, concise, most efficient way without putting a spin on it.
Fair enough. Now, I mean, interesting you mentioned 9/11 because the sort of, if you look at the world, it's pre 9/11 and post 9/11, broadly speaking, at least for millennials like me who sort of grew up in this at that time, and it was during that post 9/11 world where people started to sort of get a bit suspicious of news because there were a lot of, like, even New York Times and a lot of people came out and said it was the right thing to go into Iraq, and later on everyone realized it wasn't.
Right.
And now in the post Trump era, they coined the word fake news or at least bring it to mainstream consumption
with great success.
Great success. How do you grapple with this level of skepticism that people have towards journalism in general? Does it frustrate you? And how do you then sort of make your way around it? How do you navigate these sorts of challenges?
It does frustrate me because it's a very easy out for people to discredit you or try to discredit you.
Yeah.
And as we said, Trump's done that particularly well, labeling everything he disagrees with as fake news.
Fake news, yeah.
I think it's starting to wear off a little bit now.
Yeah, you think?
I think that
Okay.
term fake news, it's just become overused.
Yeah.
And there's only one defense for that, and that's the truth. If I know in my heart that I'm reporting the truth,
Yep.
doing the best I can, then that's all I need to sleep easy at night. Because it doesn't really matter if the person next door thinks
Things that or not, yeah.
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 And they may choose to watch us. They may choose to think that we're bullshit. I'd hope they wouldn't.
Yeah.
But I get it. People have preconceived ideas about news, especially mainstream media.
Yeah.
Even the term MSM, mainstream media, that's kind of a term of derision these
Exactly,
days.
yeah.
There's only so much marketing that can get past that. I think you've just got to keep doing a good job. And the fact that we're still here,
Yeah.
we still get paid to do it. We still, I believe, do a pretty good job of representing what's going on in Melbourne every day.
Yeah.
That track record eventually speaks for itself more than any two-word catch cry, fake news or
Yeah.
MSM
No, absolutely.
will last. Definitely frustrating though. Like it's
Yeah.
so you work hard, we work really hard, and then for someone just to think that
That
they can
can be
dismiss
easily
your work,
discredited. Yeah.
with that term.
Yeah.
But in the sense, I think in America, it's fired up the news industry. You know, like they work even harder now because, you know, they're like, why would you try to discredit us?
Exactly.
And now, as we're seeing, you know, with Trump, there's that alternate version of facts that he likes to present, or that people who support him might like to present.
Yeah.
And soon enough, you dig deep enough, and a lot of those claims just get debunked pretty quickly.
Yeah. And so just a bit on this one, and then we can move on to the next topic, which is like, what made you choose electronic media versus print media? And is that the right way to describe, as in
Yeah, digital or TV.
Yeah.
Well, to be honest, I never had visions of being a journalist. I just loved television. That was probably what the September 11 reference was heading towards. I used to be obsessed with sport, so watching the sport on the news every night. And
any
then-
kind of sport, or
Yeah, as a
Okay.
kid, I was obsessed with anything.
yeah,
And so it was that love of live television that really got me started. Then I realized that because I'm not an elite athlete, nor do I have particular connections in the commentary world, that I was probably not going to make it as a sports broadcaster. So I had to try something else.
Yeah.
So I ended up being, when I was 21, doing work experience at a country TV station, GWN, which is the equivalent of Prime here. Did some work experience there in the newsroom, and on my first week as a work experience kid, got a story to air about a car accident just outside Bunbury, which is in the southwest of WA. And again, it was that unlock moment. Like, they were like, oh, that's pretty good. I thought I'd done a terrible job. But all it takes sometimes in life is, you know, what is it, that Lady Gaga quote? There could be 99 people in the room.
Yeah.
And if one person believes you, that's all you need. I think I might be paraphrasing Lady Gaga there. But essentially, if you doubt yourself and others might, sometimes it's just that one person that believes in you can unlock that. And so for me, I never really dreamt of becoming a print journo or even writing so much long form. To me, it was using the pictures, it was using the sound,
The visual,
it was,
yeah.
and that buzz of live television. I still,
it's exciting.
I love that moment
Yeah, I
when
know.
you
I'm
hear the
so
news
jealous.
theme in your ear,
Yeah.
and shit's going down, and you know you've got to tell the world about it.
Fair enough. But do you have any memories of the one story that you covered or broke, and it was like, and you were like, oh my god, this is like an adrenaline junkie type rush?
I think it's different for everyone. Some people get off on breaking the big, exclusive, and sure, that's great. To me, my strength, my passion is like breaking news. So,
Yep.
unfortunately, in news, that generally means that there's something bad's happened
Yeah,
when you get
yeah.
that rush. You know, take it back to 9/11, for example.
Yeah.
Probably some of the most significant stories in my time have been, you know, bushfires.
Yep.
The start of the pandemic, which was a very exciting, I'm not sure if that's the right word, shocking time.
Yeah.
Remember those first couple of weeks in March
Yeah.
2020?
Yeah.
Every hour there was something
Yeah.
new. That was sort of a feeling I've never experienced. Burke Street, the two Burke Street
Yeah.
incidents in Melbourne
Yeah.
in 2017 and the
They
next
were,
year,
yes.
2018.
Yeah.
I was on the front line of that, and that was again a moment where you feel like something's changing. You feel like a bit of Melbourne turned a little bit dark. Maybe a little
Yeah.
part of it died inside.
Yeah, yeah,
It's recovered,
yeah.
but I'll never forget that first Burke Street attack with the car. Corner of Burke and William Streets where we were set up,
Yeah,
and there was a mangled stroller
yeah,
on the ground.
yeah.
Silence.
I know. That was yeah,
The trams were stopped in the middle of the street.
Yeah.
There was cars. It was like a movie set had
Yeah.
finished for the day.
yeah,
And that will stay, that haunting. So you could hear the city going on behind you and on the other side of the roadblock.
Yeah.
But for that point in time, life had stopped in the heart of Melbourne.
Yeah.
And I was pretty new to Melbourne at that stage, and just remember thinking, oh my goodness, like something bad has happened here, and a little bit of Melbourne has changed that day.
I agree. That was a painful moment for the city.
Hugely painful.
Hugely painful and unforgettable, painful, and quite grim. Yeah.
Now, the
Yeah.
city really came together. You know, the next day there was 2,000, flowers.
Yes. Yeah.
In the mall.
But that's the good thing about Melbourne, right? Like, no matter what happens, the city comes together.
Yeah, it's
It
able to
always
grieve.
comes together.
It's able to
Yeah.
celebrate
And heal.
and heal.
Yeah.
And we've done that over the last 3 years, haven't we?
I know. I mean, if the lockdown was any testament, with all the challenges, yes, the city came together and did what they had to, which is I think fantastic.
Yeah, tough times in that pandemic. The city was a very angry place,
Yeah.
and we were, at the forefront of it, copping it every day. It was a lot of people, a lot of journos didn't last the pandemic.
Yes.
It took their toll. It took its toll, and I think people lost their passion for the game.
Do you think that was specifically in Victoria, or do you think nationwide that was the case for journalists?
Probably more accentuated in Victoria.
Yeah.
It was a real challenge every day reporting on the same thing and trying to make it different. And the only thing people cared about was, when is this lockdown going
Lockdown
to
got
end?
in. Yeah.
And you look back on it now, and the way we treat COVID is so wildly different that you can't help but think, like,
There was a time when.
should we have done things differently?
Yeah. Yeah. And now speaking about the fun side.
Yeah.
Because Melbourne, we've got throughout the calendar year, we've got so many things happening. We start off with Australian Open,
Grand Prix.
then the footy's on, then the Melbourne Cup, and then in between you've got Food and Wine Festival and 100 other events, Comedy Festival. What's the most fun thing that you look forward to as a reporter and as a Melburnian?
As a reporter, it's a couple of things. I think the footy season starting, and also footy finals.
Do you have a team that you...
I go for West Coast, growing up in Perth. So this, last year and this year, not so much about my team, but that's fine. It's good fun. Melbourne's a great city when the local teams are up and about. I don't think you have an appreciation for that growing up interstate.
Yeah.
Growing up in Perth, it was just Eagles or Dockers and nothing else mattered. You come here and it's more part of your bloodline than it is
it is.
anywhere else. So footy season starting is fantastic. March is an amazing month in Melbourne. The weather's perfect.
Yep.
You've got all those events.
Yep.
And the city, as we said together, like it was able, the city grieves and celebrates and heals together. It parties together. Like Melbourne loves an event. Rain, hail, or shine, baby.
Absolutely.
We'll be there.
Yeah.
We'll be there. So from a journalist perspective, love the events.
Yeah.
And also, I think from a living in Melbourne, I think the 2 weeks of the Australian Open are two of the greatest weeks of the year. I think grand final week's fantastic.
It's amazing. You meet so many people from all over the world, which you normally wouldn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's one thing about Melbourne that no other city, maybe Sydney, but Sydney doesn't get behind its events like Melbourne does. I think there's a real community spirit with events here, whereas in Sydney, I feel like
Everyone's precious about their suburbs.
here
No,
or
in Sydney.
Well, I think they're precious about their suburbs here as well, but
There's still, as you said, a sense of community.
Yeah.
Like if there's a game at MCG, regardless of where you live, everyone goes there.
and you might not be supporting the team, but you'll get into the vibe and just go.
Yeah.
And Sydney kind of gets behind its, specifically at a sport level.
Yeah.
When their teams are doing well, or when it's when it's
fair enough.
fashionable to do so.
Yeah.
Well, Melbourne has to work hard at its personality. Sydney's the pretty sister. Melbourne has the personality, and so I
Yes,
think
the
its
more
personality-
vibrant, vivacious one.
Yes.
Yes.
It's got the good banter. It's got
Yes.
the good sense of humour.
Good food.
Good food. It's always up for a good time.
And we love to drink. We do. Like we're having beer right now. So, I'm not even sorry about
I'm
that.
actually spilling it on my shirt, so I'm not doing a very good job of drinking.
This is a
but
podcast. We're not supposed to be prim and proper, yeah. We have to own...
I'll take your lead.
Yes. And I'm just fascinated to know, like, do you have any favorite journalists in the world? And I'm always curious about this because I have a few, like, I'm always looking forward on every Sunday to read what, say, Maureen Dowd in New York Times has to write.
Do you?
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
What Nicholas Kristof has to write. I have read every word Wesley Morris has ever written. And
Wow.
even from movie reporting, like Carl Buchanan. And I mean, it's so. I have a New York Times subscription, so probably I follow the journalists more there, which is a bit biased there. But I'm always curious to know a journalist's point of view about other journalists. Like, are there any journalists that you say follow, idolize, or have a sense of kinship with? And it could be from
Yeah.
any time and space.
You know, you
Not space, sorry, any time or region. Yeah.
in the lead up to this interview, I think you had that question in the email, and I've been stewing over it for a couple of weeks, struggling to come up with an answer because I'll give you one. Annabelle Crabb.
Yes.
Love
of course.
Annabelle Crabb.
Of course. Yes.
I think she's fantastic.
Yeah.
She has a natural ability to use her intelligence to ask really good questions.
Yeah.
But then she hasn't forgotten the ability to be a normal person in her
Yeah.
job. Like Kitchen Cabinet, that show when she interviewed politicians in their kitchen was fantastic.
Yes.
I love that blend of, for want of a better word, lifestyle and news. Like personality and news is so important.
Yeah.
Because
And it was disarming for us to
Yes.
watch it. It was so disarming because it was like, okay, it was just talking to someone.
yeah, I think we forget that there are humans behind
Yeah.
the politician,
The politician,
the journalist, whatever the high powered job is. And I think it's important to lift the lid on that because there's only so much that a job title will tell you about someone, especially when they're in a position of power.
Yeah.
And so to crack them open a little bit and see what's under the surface
Yeah.
is not in every instance. When there are heavy, serious issues at bay, then you want to know about the serious policy and the issues at hand. But then I think it's also important to have the background context of why that person's making those decisions and perhaps what's led them to that. So that's one person, Annabelle Crabb. I kept leaning towards, in answering your question, like styles of journalism.
Yeah.
I love like short, sharp writing.
Yeah.
Really concise.
Yep.
As fewer words as possible. Not a fan of like long prose. So I think from that perspective, it really depends on the story. I love reading feature pieces about, for example, Anzac Day. I covered the dawn service, on this one on Anzac Day, the 25th, and I read a piece in the Herald Sun about the sort of the vibe of the day, and it was so beautifully written.
Yeah.
Just an observant piece about what's going on, and I think that's what I love about this job is you get to observe and take the temperature of a city or particular part of the city about an issue that you're working on.
Yep.
And that to me is a great privilege to be able to get access to people and places, see the vibe, what's happening, and then tell other people about it. I always relate it to like when you've got a really good story, you can't wait to tell your mates, get this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, for the most part, we get to do that every day.
And that is awesome. I love journalists. I remember, and when this is sort of funny, when David Farenthal from the Washington Post won the Pulitzer Prize, they were announcing it, and there was a video on Twitter because he did amazing reporting on the Trump Foundation thing. And I watched that video of that announcement a couple of times, and I had no idea who this guy was. Until I had read him, but I didn't know how he looked like. But it's one of those things that I think we as consumers of news and we as a general public speaking, we take a lot of pride when journalists do well. It's true. Whether we consciously may want to admit that or realize that or not, I do feel news and journalism gives us that oxygen that we so desperately need.
Yeah.
I genuinely believe that.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an important job. And you've got your favourites, and that's good. That means you trust them, you respect them.
I trust them, but I also have learned to appreciate what they bring to the table because it's a very non-partisan, fact-based, but at the same time giving a view and not just not giving a view which is not from a partisan lens. It's hard to explain, but it's like a very fact-based one, but they also take the time to call out the bullshit.
Yeah, provide a bit of context.
Context, exactly.
Rather than
Thank you. Yeah. Rather than just rambling on.
Yeah. And that's the challenge in today's news world, is that we're having to produce more with less, fewer people, fewer resources, And providing that context is so important, yet increasingly difficult because you've got another deadline, you've got another hourly bulletin. So for you to be able to recognise that in someone's writing is great because it's, especially with political stuff when there are claims made and
You have to fact
facts
check,
in inverted commas thrown out.
Yeah.
Or, funding announced. Well, is it new funding? Has it been announced before, but you're just spinning the words around so it sounds new?
Yeah.
That's the kind of important work that has to be done rather than just being a mouthpiece. Even if you're not taking sides, being a mouthpiece.
Yeah.
It's not a great deal to regurgitate. It's not a great help to society to regurgitate a press release, but it is increasingly difficult to get the time to do that. It's a real challenge.
No, great. Now, 2 questions I'm going to ask you is that, firstly, what advice would you give to someone who wants to take up journalism as a career?
Be flexible.
Yep.
You're going to have to be flexible. You're going to have to be agile, prepared to move around.
Talk to us about agile. How can you distill that a bit?
So I think agility comes in many forms. In news, you're going to have to be prepared to cover different topics that you're not necessarily familiar with, which is a fair given you're a journalist, you cover a lot of things. But also the medium in which you cover it. When I started out in television, social media was very much in its infancy. We certainly didn't have a presence online.
Yeah.
Now, social media for a news outlet is an enormous part of our day-to-day business.
Yeah.
And it drives content, it drives revenue, it drives marketing, and it's a great way to get out and about. So that, in a sense, we've had to be agile and learn to adapt to that while still maintaining our flagship product, the 6 p.m. news. There are other ways to work to get your brand out there. I think you're going to have to be prepared if you're a new journalist, like start in the country, not a big deal. I did 18 months in the bush in WA, had the best 18 months of my life.
Yeah.
At that age, 21, you're on your own out in the country. You get to sink your teeth into stories that would take you years to get the opportunity to get if you started in Metro. The Premier would come to town when I was living in Kalgoorlie in the goldfields, and there's me asking the Premier questions at 21 because I started in the country. So you might have a preconceived idea, and I did. I wanted to be a sports journo. I wanted to be a sports presenter, a commentator. Like, eventually went out the window. But you'll find a passion for something else along the way.
Yeah. And probably an unfair question. And should journalists have politics, personal politics?
Well, they have to, don't they? But does it have to come into their work?
That's what I was going to ask you. And how do you sort of navigate that challenge?
Well, unless you're setting out to
sort of question is that, one of the things which annoys me is when people just randomly say stuff like, oh, this journalist is partisan, because you cannot help but be, to an extent, but at the same time you can't help but be fact. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I think it's you wouldn't be human if you didn't
exactly
have an opinion about something.
Yeah.
And whether it's politically in line or not. I think the great skill in journalism is being able to portray both sides. Now, that's a very subjective thing, because if I presented a report and your take on it might be very different to what your understanding of being partisan or bipartisan in a particular way would be very different to what I think.
Yes, agree.
So
yes,
that's the great thing about news. It is subjective. Much like people say, why is this news? Why is this a story? Well,
it's
you might
important.
not think it is,
yeah,
but other people did. I did a story this week, interviewed a 34-year-old millionaire who just bought a penthouse.
I did see that, yes.
And it was a record sale for an apartment.
How did you afford it? Anyways, that's
he's much smarter and richer than I.
Yeah.
You know what? It's not going to win a Walkley Award. Yeah, it wasn't going to lead the bulletin. But I tell you what, it's still interesting to know how a 34-year-old man can afford a $39 million apartment that he's going to use only on weekends. So from that perspective, I was like, that's clearly why we're doing the story. But people might go, well, you should be spending more time doing this. And that's a valid criticism. It's not necessarily meaning that you're right, I'm wrong, or that I'm right, you're wrong. The great thing about news is that it's so subjective. So coming back to that original question, you just have to do your best. Like, I don't think there's a particular formula other than, getting both sides of the story.
Yep.
that's right or wrong. The other thing about getting both sides of the story, harking back to what we were saying before, is context.
Yeah.
Like how much voice do you give to one side of the argument
Correct.
compared to the other?
Yeah.
And that's a judgment call that has to come from the newsroom. The good thing about a newsroom is that there are a lot of personalities. There's lots of political sways, political persuasions, genders, age, you name it. So it's not, when I write something, I ain't the only one that's writing it and it's going to air untouched. It goes through several people.
Yep.
You're also in the car with the cameraman who can bounce stuff,
Yes.
or camera operator who can
Yep.
bounce stuff off with. You've got one producer who's looking after you. You've got the executive producer who's goes through your script, and you've got the news director as well, plus the editor in the video suite, all of whom have a particular way of seeing things. So the more eyes that can see it in the newsroom, the better. And I think that's how you ensure that things get done properly. You put it to a lot of people,
Yep.
and you work out the way through it.
Way through it.
We have tough discussions sometimes,
I
like
can imagine. Yeah.
arguments. People get pissed off that,
Yeah.
you know, the producer thinks they should be doing something differently. We had an argument yesterday about a story in the bulletin that some people thought shouldn't be in there, so others did. And it's part of a healthy democracy, I guess, is that people disagree, and eventually you work out a way to cover it.
I agree. I think dissent and discourse are two very essential things in any democracy. So you have to be able to debate. And
We're losing a
disagree.
bit of that, though, at the moment, don't you think?
I think we're fighting a lot.
Well, people seem to take things
Personally, this is a very recent phenomenon in the post-social media thing. I think it's become everyone's sensitive
Yeah.
suddenly.
And I've been a victim. I've been guilty of that. Like, you know, you get some feedback online and you're like, oh, okay, well, that stings. And I'm like, actually, no, like, whatever. Like,
Yeah, 'cause
that's your opinion. Doesn't mean that I have done something wrong or that you're necessarily correct or wrong. Like, I think you have to hear those criticisms or hear those suggestions and take them on board, not fire back a missive.
Correct.
Why I'm right and you're wrong.
Yeah, and the reality is you will never be able to make everyone happy. You will
No.
never be able to cater to everyone's idea of what you should be. So you just have, as you said rightly, you have to do what's best.
But I think
Yeah.
social media is definitely affected our ability to take on board criticism without taking it personally. I think because you write one comment and it's just there. It's
Yeah.
not a natural conversation. You can't read cues. You can't read non-verbal communication.
Yeah.
Your reading of that comment is under your bias.
Yeah. Oh, don't even get me started on Insta bros. They just annoy me, but that's a different
You go
podcast
through the Facebook
episode
comment
altogether.
section
Yeah,
on
I
our
do.
page, and it's
It's horrendous.
something else.
So what's next for you, mate? Do you in terms of like, do you see yourself as an editor, I'm not a show, sorry, a TV news producer or broadcaster, or any of those aspirations you're harboring at the moment?
Look, I'm enjoying the ride, Vic. I keep getting some good opportunities. I've been lucky to cover 2 Olympics in Rio and Tokyo. A couple of Commonwealth Games. I love that element.
How exciting is
Yeah,
that? That's awesome.
that was a real bucket list. Unfortunately, we don't have the Olympics for a few years now. Channel 9's got them, so I won't be doing any more games for a while. I don't know. I'm happy with where it's at.
Go with
I
the
still
flow.
think that, like, every day you get to do something different,
Yep.
especially as a TV journalist in a big capital city.
Yes.
Some days I do not like the job. Other days it's the best thing in the world. But I think that's like most people have those days, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think news is very important. I can't emphasize this enough. And it's always important to
Good
have...
news is
Good
important.
news is
Yeah,
important.
like
Like, I mean, look
solid
at
news.
Al Jazeera, the kind of work they do.
They're
It's
amazing. Yeah, I've
It's
got a
like-
mate that works in Al Jazeera in Doha,
Like-
and very impressed with the stuff they put out. Part of the fabric of news. I don't think every news outlet has to be the same.
No, it doesn't have to be the same. Yes, absolutely agree. But it's, as you said, good news.
Yeah.
Whatever in whichever format or style it may be,
Yeah.
it just has to be good,
Solid
effective
work.
news, solid work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're almost towards the end of the show. I think I could probably have another episode because I can talk to you, it looks like, for hours about journalism and stuff like that. We ask everyone who comes in the show to say, what's the one thing you love about Melbourne City?
There's always something on.
Yeah.
There's always something to do. You walk through the CBD. It's very rarely quiet. Melbourne gets into its events. It gets into its activities. It doesn't matter if it's 6 degrees and raining. Melbourne's geared for that.
Yeah.
Growing up in Perth, can't beat Perth in summer. every day's between 28 and 40 degrees, and it's perfect. But in winter, Perth hibernates. Like, it's wet. It's wetter than Melbourne. You get more rain in Perth in winter than here. And other than the footy, there's nothing that I found. There was not a whole lot, big events on. Whereas Melbourne, there's something on every night of the week.
Absolutely, yeah.
You can go out for dinner in the city on a Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and there's stuff going on.
You can go to bars,
Yeah.
restaurants. I mean, there's so much to do.
I mean, it also means you need to have a good bank balance, because sometimes having fun in Melbourne means you've got to spend money.
Yes. Oh, you could not as well if you depends. I'll give you tips. I'll do a whole episode on how you can go on have a good time in Melbourne on a budget.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I feel like at the moment things are so expensive. Oh my gosh.
It is, of course. I mean, depends on where you go and what you want to do, but there's always options. That's why I love Melbourne. There's so many things.
There is stuff
for everybody.
To do. I just love walking through the city and exploring, finding a laneway I haven't been down.
Yeah.
But to answer your question a bit further, I think it goes back to what we were talking about before. Melbourne has this real community spirit. Like, it has a buy-in.
Yes.
To itself.
Yep.
Without being pretentious.
Yeah.
I think, when we talk about other capital cities, Sydney has that as long as it's fashionable and it's cool. Perth has that as long as the weather's good, but it doesn't have the same level of events that we have here.
Yeah.
And I just feel like Melbourne is quite a friendly city. Not so much during lockdown. It was a little bit of an angry town, but that was completely normal given what we were going through.
Yeah.
But no, I just love that Melbourne gets into things, like gives it a go.
Yeah. And I agree 100%. And the second one is, what is your anthem song? Is there a song, your go-to song, no matter what?
So I have a few. My music taste kind of changes like the wind that my current anthem is written about. Carly Rae Jepsen.
Okay. Which one?
Well, it's called Western Wind.
Okay.
And growing up it's written about California, like technically a California breeze.
Yeah.
But I think it speaks to more than that. And because I grew up in Perth, you might have heard of the Fremantle Doctor or the sea breeze that comes in every day, especially in summer, and allows you to live in Perth. And then in life, it's like coming in like a western wind. I feel like it's a metaphor for life. Like, if you can ride the breeze when it's strong, when it's not blowing, you'll be right. Because things come and go. Happiness comes and goes. Sadness comes and go. Friendships, love come and go.
Yep.
And I think you have to acknowledge that sometimes it's going to be blowing hard, sometimes it's going to be still.
Yep.
And if you can ride those ups and downs, then you'll be right.
Awesome. That's very profound.
Is it?
I think so. I mean, I didn't.
I only had half a beer, so.
No, the point about the wind is quite interesting, right? Like, I didn't when I heard that song, which was a very long time ago. I probably didn't. Maybe I wasn't paying attention, or I didn't get that from that song. But it's the way you've described it.
It's like
it's
waves.
A lot more deeper than perhaps what necessarily I would have picked up. I love her other song, "Run Away with Me," which I think is very, very
She's
good.
great.
She's
I
great.
saw her at Golden Plains in March.
Yeah.
Having not really subscribed to being a Carly Rae Jepsen fan, other than Call Me Maybe in 2012.
Yes.
And she was just amazing. Great stage presence, great fun. If I had another anthem, would be like a Moby song, like Porcelain from like the late 90s.
Moby's awesome. Yes.
Moby's great.
Oh, he's brilliant.
Yeah.
Always brilliant. And sorry, before we wrap up, I was meant to ask you this question earlier, but I'll ask you now. What's your pulse from the city on the voice vote? What do you think?
Well, Melbourne's the clearly most progressive city in the country.
Yeah.
I think Melbourne supports it.
Okay.
Generally speaking.
Yeah.
Very interesting to see what Lydia Thorpe, the ex-Green senator, because she's against the voice now, and some other voices, typically on the left, although dissenting, have come out against it. But I think the fact that it was written by a large group of Indigenous people with the statement, or a statement from the heart, I hope it gets up.
Yep.
I think it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us. I was worried about when Peter Dutton said that the Liberals aren't going to support it. I thought that was an interesting tact, because polls are showing that a majority of Australians support the voice.
Yeah. Be interesting to see what happens.
From that perspective, it was an interesting tact. Whether they're just saying no for the sake of saying no, I'm not sure. I don't think it'll act like a third chamber of parliament. I see the positives in things, like what could it be rather than what it shouldn't be.
Yes.
And I think in general, we probably need to look at that a little bit more rather than trying to find the negatives and pull it apart.
Yeah.
Perhaps look at the positives of what it could be.
Yes.
And I think it's a generational opportunity for change and representation for Indigenous Australians.
Cool. No, I agree with you 100%. I think it's important, and I think all eyes will be on that. Everyone is going to be looking forward to what happens with that.
It frustrates me, and it was always going to happen, but it still frustrates me that it becomes a political.
But that's the world we live in,
tool.
right? No, everything has become a political football, pretty
Sure.
much.
Yeah.
Unnecessarily.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's
I just hate it when things around human rights, like the marriage equality vote, in the end it became a political thing.
It did, but when that. It was, the euphoria when...
Oh, that was one of the greatest days of my life.
It was like, you could just see everyone, regardless of where they stood at that point in time when the results came out, was somehow euphoric. You cannot help yourself but not be excited
I'll remember that day till I die.
Was...
And I know, acknowledging that a lot of people had a particularly difficult time during that campaign.
Yeah.
Especially young queer people whose families might not have supported them. But I also believe that sometimes that things that are worth having are not easy.
And are worth fighting for.
Exactly, Vic.
Yeah.
Worth fighting for.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have had that same euphoria had it been walked through. Now, the world's not geared for my euphoria, but I think that
You'd be surprised.
I acknowledge and I understand that moment now more than ever because
Yes.
of the shit fight that we went through to get there.
Yes.
And I'm proud of that day. I'm proud of our country, and I hope that we can replicate that with the voice.
Fingers crossed and hoping for the best. Well, we're almost at the end of it, so thank you very much, Blake, for joining Let's Talk Melbourne. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I genuinely want to thank you and congratulate you for all the work that you've done as a journalist, and we rely on you. The city relies on you. And I'm not saying this because you're here. I'm just saying this because I think we need good journalists. We desperately need good journalists. And me, as a Melburnian, and the city as a whole, from what I can understand, is that we definitely support good journalism, and we rely on people like you to bring us the news and to keep us informed, engaged, excited, and hopeful. And I think that's a privilege. So thank you. It's a privilege for you, I guess. But thank
It's
you.
an absolute privilege. It's a very privileged job.
So thank you for doing what you're doing, as
one
well
that
as
I
say.
don't take lightly. So, thank you.
Thank you again. Cheers, Matt. We would like to thank our sponsors, Construct Mart and Floors Trading and Clearance Center, and also let you know that this podcast has been recorded from Image Online Studio in Abbotsford. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening, and please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also follow us on Instagram at Let's Talk Melbourne.